So, we were talking about, basically, we sort of finished what we want to say about Islamic law. The so-called usul al-fiqh, the roots of the fiqh. Fiqh being the study of Islamic law, we would call Islamic jurisprudence. Usul meaning roots. And we found out that for the Sunnis, they were Koran, Hadith, Sunnah, and Qiyas, which is an hour. Also sometimes called Rai, reason or opinion. And we saw the different schools of Sunnism. Gibb has all this in his book. As it turns out, there are 4 schools: Hanafis, aimed after early jurists from 700, late 700s to mid 850s. Malikis, Shafis, and Hanbalis. And so what's the, schools? Not a lot, really, except maybe they'll do a little bit different in the prayer ritual, what a raka is, and so on. Different, maybe, divergence of opinion on divorce practices, when a judicial interference is possible. You'd have to study it very carefully to see the difference in the various schools of law. But the reason they're all called Sunnis is because it's based on the Sunnah of the Prophet, which is considered to be based on the Hadith literature. And I told you the Hadith literature was this vast literature that was collected from the 700s and 800s, all over the Islamic world, and pretty soon just about everything got into the Prophet's mouth that was culturally viable. And in fact, there was even one hadith that said, anything good that's ever been said, you can take it as if I've said it. So, that's why Western scholars have a lot of problem with the hadith literature, and the Muslim scholars don't, but Western scholars do. And as I said, the Eastern scholars only criticize the hadith literature on the basis of the chain of transmission. Well, a Western scholar would say any good, clever forger, if he was interested in making things look authentic, would have a decent chain of transmission attached to it. I heard from so-and-so, heard from so-and-so, heard from so-and-so, heard from so-and-so, who saw the Prophet do such and such thing, who saw the Prophet say such and such thing. That chain was called Isnad. And Muslim hadith criticism just is, are the names on the Isnad good Muslims or not? Well, that's not a sufficient way to criticize the authenticity of the term. It's like saying, is the New Testament, is Mark a good Christian? Or is John a good Christian? Is that enough to criticize the New Testament? Of course not. Just because Mark's name is on the gospel doesn't mean the gospel is reliable. And the gospel is just a big hadith. Even the word hadith means good news. The Gospels are just huge hadith. That's how I came to understand how the Gospels were, by studying the hadith literature, showing how hadith develop and are collected and so on. So this is the fight between so-called Orientalists and non-Orientalists that our friend Edward Said was so worried about. And I don't think he has any understanding of what the issues were or are. And classical Western Orientalists were extremely people of great rectitude, upright and very honest and decent people, and none of them were into colonialism. They were interested in the culture, and they were, first generations or so of Islamic scholars in the West are really tremendously admirable. And so this propagandistic degradation of them that I see is extolled in our comparative literature department as they float out celebrations of Edward Said and others is really so far from the truth it boggles the mind. And I studied with some of these people, and I know how incredibly impressive they were. Shocked was a teacher of mine, and though he never gave me any benefit of anything, and he was a very stern taskmaster. You were afraid. If you knocked on his door, you were afraid. You knock on his door, and you know he was in there, and said, "What do you want? What do you want?" Like that, you know. You would quake when you went into his office. So, still, he wrote the book on Mohammedan jurisprudence, as he's called, and you can read that book if you wanted to. We talked about Islamic theology, and Arberry, who in the 900s put a stop to free thinking, if you like, in Islamic theological areas with his school of Bila Kaifa, about 950. All this is going on in Baghdad under the Abbasids. But the Abbasids are weakening. You know, the Buyids are coming in the 950s, the Seljuks in the 1000s. So we're getting a real weakening there. So the culture is still a high point in the 800s, but by the 900s it's beginning to both solidify and deteriorate. So the high point, what is the high point of Islamic culture? The 800s in Baghdad under the Abbasids. You say, well, what happened after that? Things froze, more or less. I don't want to say completely. With these ideas, for instance, in theology, Bila Kaifa, don't ask how, why. That's the way it is. Do it. And that's the world that we know today in Islam 1,000 years later. Don't ask how or why. Do it. And they were asking how and why in the 900s. And Al-Ashri put a stop to that. The same thing in Islamic law. The early jurists who created these schools of law were using their own mind to deal with issues. After them, the gate of ijtihad was considered closed. So in jurisprudence, the gate of ijtihad, the gate of individual reasoning was considered closed. And then finally, in philosophy, which had really taken off from the Greek philosophers, when they were translated in Baghdad in the 800 period, all these great works of Greek philosophy that had been lost to the West in the Dark Ages, when Christianity put another similar blanket down over Christian thought, what we call the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, and there was no real thought that was credible thinking, except religious thinking. Well, that happened with a famous Muslim, Al-Ghazali. He had studied the philosophers. And this would be about the 1000s. And originally he was a student of the philosophers. But then he became disillusioned with them, so he wrote the book I told you about, Takafut. I don't have the spelling of this right. Philosophiyun, something like that. Anyway, the incoherence of the philosophers, attacking them. And after him, he went in the way of Sufism. Sufism is Islamic mysticism. No one knows why it's called Sufism, except that it's, they say Suf in Arabic means wool, and they wore wool clothes the same as like Buddhist teachers maybe wore, I forget what their yellow robe or cloak that they wore was made out of something. I don't know exactly what the material was, but something that they wore. It could relate to that influence. No one even knows if it really comes from the wool cloaks that they wore. That's the theory. And a Sufi is a mystic. It's close to what in the West came to be called, in the Christian period, Gnosticism. So it went away from this world to otherworldly pursuits, looking for the one, identification with the one, trying to get out of your body, become one with God. And many fundamentalist Muslims saw this as heresy, as we'll see in some of the texts that we're now going to look at very quickly. But Ghazali went in that direction. And for a long time, from about the 1100 AD on to maybe 1900 AD, Sufism swept the Islamic world. Frankly, I think it's a more healthy phenomenon than fundamentalism that we're now seeing. These people did their own individual things and sought individual enlightenment and salvation through their own practices, and either through like yoga, Hindu type things, or dancing, or different things of that kind. But today, with this strict fundamentalism, anyone who steps out of line is considered to be an unbeliever, and even you could be killed if you are not towing the right line and things. This is, to my mind, an even worse backward step than the Sufism one was. Now, that's just my own personal judgment. A Muslim may think otherwise. That's up to you. But I think the world of Sufism, if nothing else, is a very creative world. And what I told you about Ibn Rushd in Spain in the 1200s, sometimes spelled like that, sometimes spelled like that. In Western translations, he became known as Averroes. And he was translated in the West. Dante, the poet of Italy in the 1200s, knows about Ibn Rushd already. Averroes and all the people that you hear, if you're a Catholic in the Catholic Church, the Scholastic Synthesis and Thomas Aquinas, they all took the work of Averroes and all these other Islamic philosophers and just applied it to Christianity. St. Thomas Aquinas had not a single stitch of originality in him. This was all Islamic work, came through Spain, and then came into the places, into the Latin West, and philosophers began to pick it up. But it did trigger the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and the humanistic revival in the Middle Ages in Europe. So in 1300, you get people like Petrarch and Boccaccio. And 14 and 1500, you get the Renaissance. The 1600s, you get the 1700s, you get the Enlightenment. And then you get the modern Western world as we know it. So through people like Averroes, the Greek philosophers and the previous classical learning came through to the West, with the added dimension of his thought on top of it. So this was a real parting of ways between the West and the East. The East, as I told you, rejected Averroes. Again, I've had many Muslims come to me, when will we be great like the West? Well, when you remember who Averroes was. And if you ask some of your teachers in mosques and other places, who is Ibn Rushd, they'll look at you with who, what? They'll be like, we don't even know him. That's because he was basically drummed out of Islam and became valued in the West. But that's not to say that he is not a great thinker. Anyway, he was from Islamic Spain in the 1200s. I'm hurrying along here because I want to get over to our cultural things. So to my mind, the dividing line came, Averroes wrote a book, Takafut, as I told you, Incoherence of the Incoherence, attacking Ghazali, but it didn't have a lot of, it didn't make a big impression in the Muslim world. And from the 1300s to the present, very little culturally occurred in the Islamic world. Nothing that one can really put one's finger on. And today, if you look at the culture in the Islamic world, it is, and I'm not trying to be cruel, but it is, I don't say a low culture, but it has not nearly the grandeur of the earlier culture. They're right to look back to Golden Age, because from the 800s to the 1300s, there was a Golden Age. There literally was a Golden Age of Islamic culture. And the creativity at the present time is like a pale shadow of it. All the great works are from that period. Even the Muslim world would acknowledge that. I've not heard of any great works being written at the moment, unless you think what's going on in Afghanistan and bringing down the World Trade Towers is a great work. But other than that, I mean, it's almost moribund intellectually. And that's sad. And of course, then there's the jealousy of the West. We don't want to be Westernized. All right, don't be Westernized. Create your own works. Who said you have to be Westernized? But we'll see. Maybe this will happen. Maybe. I can't speak to that. I hope it does, because Islamic culture at its flowering was extremely beautiful. So that's what we're going to look at. And basically, first thing I want to look at was these poems, these pre-Islamic Arab poetry. So we'll turn over to that now. This is all going to be cultural things. We've already done, you missed it because you were interested in the Shiites, as you say, but you missed, we discussed all the Imams, so I apologize for that, but we can't go over it again, so we've got to keep moving. So now, the basis of pre-Islamic Arab poetry was the Qasida. Qasida is an Arab word for ode. We call it the pre-Islamic Arab ode. And the theory behind the Qasidas was that there were seven great poems, supposedly. There were lots of people did collections, the same as they collected hadith. But there were seven great poems. These were called the Mu'allaqat poem. Extended. It really means, the word Mu'allaqat means extended. The myth behind the extended poems was that before Islam came, they used to have poetry contests in Mecca at the time of the pilgrimage, when the tribes weren't fighting, and they would go to these pilgrimage and these meetings, and then the poets would compete with each other. This is probably all mythology, and there's probably very little truth to any of it. But in any case, the myth was that the greatest poems were hung up in gold leaf in the Kaaba. I'm sure that's a later retrospective presentation of the person who collected the Mu'allaqat poems. And the Mu'allaqat poems were collected in Baghdad in the 800s again. So why were these poems and other things being collected in Baghdad in the 800s? Because it's pre-Islamic material. One of the reasons is that the idea was that the real great Arabic was spoken in the desert, and that people actually used to send their children out to be brought up by Bedouin tribes so they could get the pure Arabic of the desert. That was one of the ideas. The second thing was that new converts were coming into Islam at a tremendous rate here under the Abbasid Empire, where Baghdad was the center, particularly Persians. And a lot of Persians were writing these grammars of Arabic. Why were they writing grammars of Arabic? So that their fellow countrymen could learn Arabic in a classical manner. So they were writing grammars, and since the real Arabic was supposed to be in the poetry, they collected the poetry to teach their co-religionists how to teach pure Arabic. So the poetic collections were done in the 800s in Baghdad. And the myth was that these are poems from the desert. I'm not sure if they're all poems from the desert or they're Persian grammarians sometimes imitating what they thought a poem from the desert should look like. which is why we talk about it under Arab culture, or rather under Islamic culture, because I think it is Islamic culture, even though it's supposed to be pre-Islamic. And so we study the Mu'allaqat because that's easier, but there were several collections made. The Mu'allaqat was the name of one collection, and another was called Hamasa, which means courage, basically. And that had, I think 450 poems in it or something. Huge collection. They collected these poems just like they collected hadith. They were very culturally ambitious in this mid-800 period in the Abbasid Empire in Baghdad. But the Mu'allaqat were an actual collection of poems. Now I've given you here under this chapter Arabia Deserta in the which I handed out. Somehow it got skipped here. And also we have in the Nicholson book, he has some of the I think he has some of the pre-Islamic poets, doesn't he? Yep, he has a chapter 3, pre-Islamic poetry and manners, and he gives selections from a lot of them here, of some of the ones that weren't in the Mu'allaqat, some of the ones that were in the Mu'allaqat poems. So that's here he's got the Mu'allaqat poems here on page 101, and you can read what he says there about the Mu'allaqat poems. As I said, this one, he's got basically the poets here that were the famous ones. The 7 Mu'allaqat poets who are still the most famous poets in Islam: Imru al-Qais, Tarafa. Let's see, what else have we got? Antaran, Labid, Al-Harith. What else have we got? Amr ibn Kulthum. We had a famous singer in Egypt in recent years called Kulthum. She's taking her name from this famous pre-Islamic Arab poet. And I think the last one here is Zuhair. Most of these are from different pre-Islamic tribes. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Pretty good, pretty good. So I've got the 7. And Nicholson has his version of it. Arberry, the handout I gave you, Islamic Civilization book. I used to like to buy the books, but it wasn't worth it for just this last 2 or 3 week period having all these books necessarily, so we Xeroxed them here for you. He's got excerpts from them, and Kritzeck, this other book here that I've Xeroxed some passages, he has a few too in his collection of the anthology of Islamic literature that he has. Who does he have in here? I think I put some of his in your collection here. You're always on time. On the exact time that you get here is always the same. I don't know how you manage it. Let's see. She has Imru al-Qais, Labid, and Tarafa. Those are the 3 that he has in here. So, again, the Mu'allaqat is just a collection like Hamas and some of the other collections that were done. I don't know who did the Mu'allaqat collection. I'm not even sure it's known. Nicholson might tell you about that. But the pretense was that these poems were so good that they were hung in gold leaf from the Kaaba, and that's where the idea of being hung extended. But most people who study these poems think they were called extended because they're long. They're very long poems. And I said I'm not sure that they're always totally authentic. It sometimes sounds like what a Persian convert to Islam might have thought a Bedouin would write about, because they have a guy, for instance, going on for about 100 lines about his camel. comparing a camel to ships in Byzantium or a bridge over the Tigris and things like that, and something you know that a Bedouin would not, imagery of Bedouin would not employ. So it's sort of like what was those when cowboys were popular in the 70s and 80s? What they call them? Not a Hollywood cowboy, but huh?
Spaghetti westerns.
No, when you were saying the guy wasn't a real cowboy, but was making believe he was a cowboy, I forgot what they would call it.
Urban cowboy?
Huh? Urban cowboy, yeah, that's right. Like an urban cowboy, like an urban Bedouin, you know. Today, for a long while, even in the Arab world, you got people wearing the headdress of different terrorist organizations had different color headdresses, and so many young men wanted to make believe they were Bedouin and stuff like that. Whereas if you live in the Arab world, you know, the average Arab hates Bedouin, despises Bedouin. I've lived in the Arab world, and I would just remember the behavior when a Bedouin would come selling carpets to different houses in different settled areas. The women would shriek at them, say, "Get away, you dirty beast," this kind of thing, throw them out, have total contempt for anyone from the desert. So this idea of aping the Bedouin and stuff, it's like Americans aping the cowboy. It's as fictional as that. It's totally childish and has no reality whatsoever. Because the Bedouin actually live their own life, are really not very much like Arabs. Well, why are they called Arabs? A Bedouin, and an Arab is a settled city person, village person. You know, he's not a Bedouin. A Bedouin is a Bedouin, and they don't have a lot in common, and they don't mix well, and they don't like each other. And they've always been trying to settle the Bedouin, but with very little success in some areas. So, in any case, this attempt to ape the Bedouin is a very odd phenomenon, which has very little reality. Well, let's see what we have in our book here, if I can find anything, the way they bound this thing together. Okay, so that's the Nicholson thing. Where's the Kritzeck? I like Kritzeck's stuff better in this because it's easier to look at. Oh, here it is. He gives you, we have two versions of this Ode of Imr al-Qais. Now, Imr al-Qais was considered a king of some of the Arab tribes in between Arabia and Iraq, some of the border areas in the Byzantine Empire period, where they were sort of both under the influence of the Byzantine Greeks, but they were also sort of frontier states with the Arab Bedouin world. And he was one of these individuals who took to the sort of wandering life because he lost his kingdom, and there's all sorts of myths surrounding Imr al-Qais. These are the most famous one. Now, after World War I, you know, Arabs became very famous, and one of the most famous persons who promoted Arabism was Lowell Thomas, the American newsman, who promoted Lawrence of Arabia. And he used to have Lawrence of Arabia shows all over, you know, places like New York, London, the Western countries, England and America and so on, which people became fascinated by Lawrence's exploits with the Arab tribes in the First World War, in the retaking of Damascus and so on. So an actual parody of this came out in the silent movie called The Sheikh. And the Sheikh starred this famous new actor in a silent movie. It's called Rudolph Valentino. How many have heard of Rudolph Valentino? Yeah, he was the famous silent movie actor and the heartthrob of that time. He was an Italian immigrant to America, but it was thought that American women who were not yet liberated, you know, palpitated after seduction scenarios with foreign men. And because a foreign man, of course, it always embodied sex. So Rudolph Valentino fit the bill for the dark, suave foreigner who was every American woman's dream of, erotic dream, I guess. And they put this in the context of a Lawrence of Arabia scenario. But what they were really doing was recreating Amr al-Qais. So the sheik would be sneaking into the Western woman's tent for lovemaking. And that's what Imr al-Qais is bragging about in his poem, about how he sneaks into tents for lovemaking and this kind of thing. And so the whole thing, I don't know if you used to hear that old song, I am the sheik of Araby, at night when you're asleep, into your tent I'll creep. There was an old sort of song that went along with these movies at that time in the 20s, all based on these poems, all based on these poems. Because Imr al-Qais is the poet of lovemaking. Of course, everything that was frowned upon in Islamic society later on. And so in some sense, I would think that you would get in this cultivating of this poetry by, I think, new converts to Islam, an attack on Islam by these new converts, who were not particularly enthusiastic for it, but had to come in order to function and be alive and have a life, have a livelihood, be able to function intellectually. So they cultivated these poems as you see, telling the Arabs, you're all puritanical Muslims now, but we'll tell you what you were like before you were Muslims. We'll tell you what the past was really like. And so the star of these poems is Imr al-Qais, and he's the premier Arab poet. What? Well, page. Can't you find it? You got some hands, but it's page 53 if that'll help you. But there's two sections there. Also, my handout here has it too. And in fact, there's three sections. There's one in Nicholson as well. There's three different versions of this material, so it is not a single page. But I'll trust to your intelligence, Mr. Paris, to find your version. In any case, these poems, as Nicholson tells you, usually began with a nasib. I don't know if we have that in the Nicholson material here. Let me see if I can find it here now. Let's see. I'm talking about pages. Let's see if we can. Working off a book without an index is really tough. Anyone see what page in the Nicholson book this material about the nasib is? Let's see, Nicholson even gives you the different verse styles. Oh, here it is. Page 77 in Nicholson. This is written from a writer that we're going to hear more about when we talk about prose. Another writer from the late 800s, Ibn Qutayba, a prose writer who wrote on different subjects. Ibn Qutayba means son of the fleet. I've heard, says Ibn Qutayba, from a man of learning, that the composer of odes began by mentioning the deserted dwelling places and the relics and traces of habitation. Then he wept and complained and addressed the desolate encampment and begged his companion to make a halt in order that he might have occasion to speak of those who had once lived there and afterwards departed. For the dwellers in tents were different from the townsmen or villagers in respect of coming and going, because they moved from one water spring to another, seeking pasture and searching out the places where rain had fallen. Then to this he linked the erotic prelude, nasib, and bewailed the violence of his love and anguish, separation from his mistress, the extremity of his passion and desire, so as to win the hearts of hearers and divert their eyes towards him and invite their ears to listen to him, since the song of love touches men's souls, takes hold of their hearts. God, having put it in the constitution of his creatures, to love the lions and the sight of women in such wise that we find very few but are attached thereto by some tie or have some share therein, whether lawful or unpermitted. And when the poet had assured himself in this manner of an attentive hearing on the part of his audience, he followed up this advantage and set forth his claim, which was to be rewarded. Thus he went on to complain of fatigue, want of sleep, traveling by night, noonday heat, how his camel had been reduced to leanness. And when, after representing all the discomfort and danger of his journey, he knew that he had fully justified his hope and expectation of receiving his due reward from the person to whom the poem was addressed, he entered into the panegyric, the madih, inciting, that is, praising the one he wanted to reward him, and kindling his generosity by exalting him above all his peers, pronouncing the greatest dignity in comparison with his to be of little. That's from Ibn Qutayba, and that's his discussion of the nasib. The nasib is this sort of love prelude, and we have several perfect ones here in the poetry before us. Let's see now if I can, I'm working on 3 different sources here. In this Arberry version of this, halt friends, both let us weep, recalling a love and a longing by the rim of twisted sands. This is page 20 of Aspects of Islamic Civilization, between Edakul and Hamal, Tudik and El-Mikrat, whose trace is not yet effaced for all the spinning of the south winds and the northern blasts. Pretty terrible translation. There all about its yards and away in its dry hollows you may see the dung of antelopes spattered like peppercorns upon the morn of separation, the day they loaded to depart by the tribes acacious. It was like I was splitting a colocynth there. My companions halted their beasts a while over me, saying, don't perish of sorrow, restrain yourself decently, yet the true and only cure of grief is tears outpoured. What is there left to lean on where the trace is obliterated? So there's an example of a nasib type of event. The poet comes to an abandoned campsite, sees the signs of a life that used to live there, and remembers an old love that he had had. Now it's interesting that Ibn Qutayba should tell you about that, about the people's hearts reacting, responding, and favorably to the story of love. Love ingratiates itself to the hearer more than any other thing. Yes. And advertisers do that today on television. And whenever you see an ad, they have a beautiful woman cooking over a barbecue or something like that, or a hunk of a man, about, all, bulging with muscles or something. They don't have Woody Allen there drinking a beer or something like that, They have some hunk of some kind there, either advertising, putting Irish Spring soap on his body or something like that, or the woman is half naked, cavorting around, and then the point of the ad comes somewhere after this nasib, this love prelude, and it's totally widespread even today in the way advertisers work, as you can yourselves better imagine it than I can explain it. So this is not new. In fact, it's very, very old, as you see, because they were doing it back in the days of Arab poetry. But it's the Nicholson gives you all the different rhythms. There were something like 16 different rhythms he gives you, and it was all very well laid out in the kind of da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, very complex rhythms with a rhyme at the end. And they had names, Al-Hawil, I think, long, Al-Hafif, light, I guess it was Al-Tawil, long, Al-Hafif, light, Rajaz, trembling, and so on. Different names for all the rhythms. Nicholson gives you all of the rhythms of the various poems. Nicholson's very good on this. That's why I use him. Now, even in India today, when you had the Beetle Revolution and Ravi Shankar came to America and was playing on the sitar and things of that kind, he was playing what? Rajas. Rajas. Well, that's right from the Arabic word for the rhythm of the pre-Islamic Bedouin poetry. They called them, even in India today, Rajas. And that was one of the rhythms of the pre-Islamic Bedouin Arab poems. So these words, this language moved very far through the Islamic world, through conquest and so on, into other cultures, and reappeared in the way that we're familiar with them now. So this is why someone like Ibn al-Qais is so shocking. Oh yes, and many a fine day I've dallied with the white ladies, and especially I call to mind a day at Dara Jul Jul, on the day I slaughtered for the maidens, my riding beasts, and oh, how marvelous was the dividing of its loaded saddle, and the maidens went on tossing its hacked flesh about, and the frilly fat like fringes of twisted silk. This is the translation into English, mind you. Ha! And a day on the back of the sand, though, she denied me, swearing a solemn oath that she should never, never be broken. And I said, gently now, Fatima, a little less disdainful, even if you intend to break with me, do it kindly. It's some habit of mine that so much vexed you, just draw off my garment from yours, and they'll slip away. So that's a lovely image. He's sort of chiding a love. Oh, well, you don't like me anymore, you don't want me anymore. Oh, well, just take my, in other words, she's still basically lying on top of her out in the sand someplace. This is quite shocking for an Islamic world. And I do feel that, in fact, the Persians were getting their vengeance on the Arabs through translating this material and saying, here, this is what you really are. Stop lording it over us in the way that you think Islam allows you to lord it over us now. And so part of the enthusiasm to translate all this poetry was, I think, that actually a Persian nationalist sort of ethos that had been submerged in Islam. So I think that line, you can certainly see what I'm talking about in that. But even the ethos of Ibn al-Qais is really modern and very impressive. Puffed up it's made you, that my love for you is killing me, and that whatever you order my heart to do, it obeys. Your eyes are only shed those tears so as to strike and pierce with those two shafts of theirs the fragments of a ruined heart. And many's the fairer veiled lady whose tent few would think of seeking. Here's the Sheikh of Araby going into the tents that so possessed the 1920s ethos of lovemaking after the Lawrence of Arabia affair in the First World War. It was all translated into sex by Hollywood through Rudolph Valentino. You know the history of the movie, so you would appreciate this. And whose tent few would think of seeking, I've enjoyed sporting with. And he brags, and not in a hurry either. I don't rush. I take my time. I don't care who's after me, and I don't care who I'm offending. You know, I'll take my time, and the hell with the rest of you, basically, is saying. Well, this is really pretty good poetry, I think, even in translation. And slipping past packs of watchmen, here's the Marua, defiance of the strong. To reach her with a whole tribe, hankering after my blood, eager every man jack to slay me. He's bragging about how tough and powerful and how daring he is. What time the Pleiades showed themselves broadly in heaven, glittering. That's why I don't consider, if this is an accurate representation of the Jahiliyyah, the period of ignorance, I've told you, I don't consider the Jahiliyyah period ignorant. A Muslim can say what they want and call it ignorant, but to me this is extremely sophisticated poetry. I told you that I think it may be influenced too by the activity in Baghdad of Persian translators trying to learn Arabic, but it's hard to say. What time the Pleiades showed themselves broadly in heaven, glittering like the folds of a woman's bejeweled scarf, I came, and already she'd stripped off her garments for sleep beside the tent flap, all but a single flimsy slip, and she cried, God's oath, man, you won't get away with this. The folly's not left you yet, I see. You're as reckless as ever. And out I brought her, and as she stepped, she trailed behind us to cover up footprints the skirt of an embroidered gown. So what's he saying here? He's gone to this woman's tent. She's ready for bed, but even though she's yelling at him, she's ready to go with him. And she goes out with him to some place, and it's not against her will either, because as they're going, she covers up the track with her garment. Now today, no Muslim woman would even dare behave like this. She'd be afraid of getting her throat cut. So unfortunately, change has occurred. I think, and I think, a deterioration, frankly. To me, things were more sophisticated back then than they are now. But you who are Muslims will have to be determined of that. I can't influence the Muslim world. I can just view it from an outsider's perspective. To me, this seems like much more sophisticated approach to the universe, that's all, than cutting women's throats for some stupid idea of honor. I don't know what you guys think. I don't want you to tell me because I don't want you to be embarrassed. Out I brought her, and she stepped. As she stepped, she trailed behind us to cover our footprints, the skirt of an embroidered gown. Which is why I think, as I've said, Islamic civilization is actually greater than the sum total of its parts. I think Islamic civilization is extremely impressive. If someone would discover it again, it's there in huge amounts to be discovered for someone who cares about real civilization, not just making statements about religious positions. But when we had crossed the tribe's enclosures and dark about us hung a convenient shadow in the desert, intricately indolent, I twisted her side tresses to me, and she leaned over me, slender-waisted as she was, and tenderly plump, her ankles shapely taut. Now he's going to describe her belly and her flesh, and he's going to go off on a huge, that's why these are mu'allaqat. They're an extended panegyric of her body. And taut her belly, white flesh, not the least flabby, polished the lie of her breastbone, smooth as a burnished mirror. By the way, there are 3 dots there, meaning that there's a break in this collection's presentation of this material. And he finally concludes, let the follies of other men forswear passion. My heart answers not, nor will I forget the love I bear you. And then he has this beautiful picture here, and I think it is beautiful. He changes gears in the middle of the poem, still in the same rhythm, still in the same whatever the rhyme pattern was, into the description of a storm coming over the desert. Really good. Friend, do you see yonder lightning? Even in English. Look, there it goes, its glitter flashing like 2 hands now in the heaped up crown storm cloud. Brilliantly it shines. So flames the lamp of an anchorite, comparing it to someone who's living in a cave someplace. As he slops the oil over the twisted wick, so with my companions I sat watching it. He's watching on a hilltop. Between, and these are place names in the desert that he knows, between Darij and El Zubayb, far-ranging my anxious gaze over Catan. So we gazed, hovered the right of its deluge, its left dropping from Al-Satar, and further Yadbul. Then the clouds started loosing its torrent like Taifa, turning upon the beards, the bowls of the tall cannibals, and over the hills of El Canaan swept its flying spray, and sending the white wild goats hurtling down on all sides. At Taima, you see, is that place of the date palm plantations that the Jews were rumored to have cultivated there, and where some of the tribes from Medina were originally exiled after the original problems in Medina and the several battles. So Taima is, we know, an oasis town now. In fact, it's in the book of Job. That Job goes to Taima in the book of Job. That's why we know the book of Job in the Bible is a Northern Arabian book. And here he mentions in the poem. So this is near Taima. At Taima left not one trunk of a date tree, and he says date trees, just like I was just saying. Standing, not a solitary fort, save those buttressed with hard rocks. And Thabir, why? When the first onrush of its deluge came, Thabir was a great chieftain, wrapped in a striped juba. In the morning, the topmost peak of Al-Mujaymir was a spindle's world, covered with all the scum of a torrent that flung over the desert. Dab el-Rabiq, its cargo like a Yemeni merchant unpacking his laden bags. In the morning, the songbirds all along the broad valley quaffed the choicest sweet wines rich with spices. The wild beasts at evening drowned in the furthest reaches of the wild watercourse, lay down, drawn bows, following. Well, anyway, it's really lovely poetry sometimes, even in translation. Now, this may not be doing it justice. Let's just take a quick look at this translation as we have it in. It's so hard to follow things here. Let's see. I'm missing about a week or two of this class. But better off. Okay, here is the Ode of Tarifa, page 53 of the Kritzeck material. He gives the whole Ode of Amr al-Qais. Beyond the reef of sand, recalling a house and a lady dismount where the winds cross, cleaning the still extant traces and colony between the 4 famous dunes. But his is a different translation. So you can compare the translations. This is by, the one we just read is by Arberry. And this translation is by, if I can get this page turned here, two other people, Herbert Howarth and Ibrahim Shukala or something. So I'm not sure it's exactly the same. It's very hard to find the one totally in the other. But there's a lot of it here anyway. Let me see if I can pick up where he's got his 3 dots there. Well, here it is towards the end. On Cannabill sees the uplands of Canaan, chasing the ibex, erasing less than stone. Only the major peaks, the bare spindles, cap the deluge. It leaves tendrils like gray wares of Yemen. Its sands were drunk at the rim of valleys. The thrushes tell the sun spice folly until evening and far off like springs of all. And yeah, that's where it did end. So it is different translation, but very similar in terms of the length of it. That's in Roland Comics. Love poem, followed by nature, praise of nature, beauty. Started with a nasib. Let's see if I can find another one who starts here with a nasib. Let's look at the next poem that we have here. Ob Labed. Sites of dwellings are these, over which since they were last inhabited many along, this is from Kritzeck, page 56. Many long years had passed with its full tale of sacred and profane months. They have been gifted with the showers of constellations of spring, the rains of thunderclouds have fallen on them in torrents and drizzles. And from every cloud at night and morning cloud that covers the sky and evening cloud, his thunder peals answer one. And he goes on like that about rain and so on, about the traces that have erased the traces. And then he finally gets to the point here. And so I stood questioning them. But why should we question the hard and lasting stories that have no clear speech to answer this? They are tenantless. And yet the whole tribe was once here. But they set out from there at dawn, and naught was left but the trench and the thatch. And the women of the tribe filled thee with longing when they set out and entered within the cotton curtains, the framework whereof creep. Litters all hung round, the woodwork of which is covered with coarse cloth, of which is fine curtains and embroideries. These women in bands, the deer of Tudik were on the litters, and the gazelles of Watra with the fawns lying around them. They were startled, and the mirage fell away, and from them as if they were tamarisk on huge rocks, the place where the valley of Bisho opens up. And then he switches gears. Does my camel resemble such a wild ass, or is she like an antelope that has lost her calf by the wild beasts? And so now he's talking about his camel, about his dogs, about hunting, and then more about storms. It's quite an exercise. But finally, he ends up with a description of his dogs hunting antelopes. So it's really about the poor antelope that's being tracked now by hunter packs. She becomes distracted and wanders about the pools and slide for 7 nights coupled with 7 long days, until when she'd lost all hope, the udder dried up, which all her suckling and weaning had not drained. She heard the sound of a man from place of concealment, and it startled her, a female antelope. For man is her vein, and so she ran off thinking that each of the 2 openings, what lay behind her and in front of her, was like to be dreaded, until when the archers lost hope, they let loose trained dogs with hanging ears and stiff collars on their necks, and they overtook her. And she turned upon them with those horns of hers, like the spears of Semhar, in sharpness and length, to keep them off. For well she knew, if she did not keep them off, that her death was at hand among those decreed by fate. And of them Wolf was run through and killed and drenched in blood, and Blackie was left in the place of his onset. These are the names of the dogs in the pack that have been set on her. And then he goes back with such a camel then, with the glittering sands danced in the noonday, and the hillocks put on the robes of the mirage. I would accomplish my desire, not falling short of it, though through doubt or because revilers revolve me for any desire among them. So they keep switching gears, different subjects. That was a picture of a hunt from the antelope's point of view, and then back to his praise of camel. So that was Labed. Let's see if I can give you Tarafa here. Zuhair, by the way, just looks like he's the prophet himself. He writes poems just like the Koran. Do not conceal from Allah whatever is in your breast, hoping it may be hidden. Allah knows what is concealed, and either it's postponed or put in a book or stored away for the day of reckoning, or it's hastened and punished betimes. So in this Zuhair is very close to the time of the Prophet, so others are writing material just like you get in the Koran. In fact, it's very difficult to see the difference between that and the Koran. So let me see now. He's got Labid's poem in here too. You can read that, but I don't see any point that we should read it a second time. We just looked at it, and he doesn't have the material about let's see, about the dogs. So I think that's really the most interesting material. I seem to be missing some material here. It's very hard to. Let me maybe pick it up. Let's see what I've got over here. See if I can find my Tarfa here. So what's he got about Emerald Al-Kai? 2021, Tarfa, 21 to 22. So, he says, but when grief assails me, straightway I ride off, mounted on my swift, lean-flanked camel, night and day racing. Sure, this is 22 in Arberry. Sure-footed, like the planks of a litter, I urge her on, down the bright highway. This is the one who goes on for millions of lines about his camel. That back of a striped mantle, she vies with the noble hot-paced she-camels, shank on shank, nimbly flying over a path many feet have beaten. A path many feet have beaten, what's that? The sunnah. The original definition of sunnah was a path over which many people had feet had beaten. A path in the wilderness. Along the rough slopes from the milkless she's pastured in springs, cropping the rich meadows green in gentle rains. So the voice of the caller, she returns and stands on guard with her bunchy tail, scarred of some ruddy tuft-haired stallion, as though the wings of a white vulture enfolded the sides. And now we get this description that doesn't end for 20 lines. Just like the woman in Emerald Al-Kai's, the hunting in the one we just read, was it Labid? Anon lashes her dry udders, withered like an old water skin, perfectly firm as her flesh and her two thighs. Now this is not the woman, this is the camel now. They are the gates of a lofty, smooth-walled castle, and tightly knit are her spine bones. Now this, I think, sounds like it was written by an urban camel jockey in Baghdad, not by a real Bedouin, because I don't think a real Bedouin would write like this about his camel, but I may be wrong. Her underneck struck with well-strung vertebrae, fenced about by twin dens of wild low trees. She might say bows were bent under a buttress spine. Widely spaced her elbows as she strides, carrying the two buckets of a sturdy water carrier like the bridge of the Byzantine. That's what I mean, comparing his camel to the bridge of a Byzantine. Whose builder it should be all encased in bricks to be raised up true. Reddish the bristles of her chin, firm her back, broad the span of her swift legs, smooth her swinging gait. Her legs are twined like rope up-twisted. Her forearms thrust slantwise up to the prop roof of her breast. You say, why would they be forging them? Well, the rhythm, the rhyme, the meter, to show their mastery of Arabic, that they could write a poem in pure Arabic just like the Bedouin masters, and add verse after verse after verse after verse of the same line and the same meter to show their intellectual facility and masterfulness. But then you get this kind of thing. Widely spaced her elbows, as if she strode carrying the two buckets of the sturdy water carrier over the yeah, I read that too. Her forearms thrust slantwise up to the prop roof of her breast. Swiftly she rolls, her cranium huge, her shoulder blades high hoisted her to frame her lofty raised superstructure. ... Meaning we skip some that actually you'll find in the Kritzeck book. Her long neck is very erect when she lifts it up, calling to the mind the rudder of a Tigris-bound vessel. So now they're on the Tigris River, and the neck of his camel he's comparing to a Tigris vessel. No, I don't think so. I mean, it's good poetry, but I don't think it was written by a Bedouin. Her skull is most like an anvil, the junction of her two halves, and I don't think this was written by a Bedouin, because it seems to me someone trying to think, well, how would a Bedouin write about his camel? Bedouins like camels, so how would he write? So then he would write like this, to show how a Bedouin would write about his camel. But anyway, if it's not Bedouin, it's a product of 800s in Baghdad. So it's still pretty classic. Her skull is like an anvil. Her cheek is smooth as Syrian parchment. No. Her split lip, tanned hide of Yemen. I don't think so. It's slit, not bent crooked. Her eyes are a pair of, I mean, how do I know? I don't know. I'm just going by intuition. I'm a doubter. I said the university subjects everything to systematic doubt. In her calves are the high brow bones, the rock of Pool's Hollow. Her ears are true. Oh my God, it goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. I'm saying, Professor Eisenman, save us, enough, enough, enough. Well, yeah. Where's page 23? I don't think there it is. And then finally he changes gears and speaks, he says, of his dissolute youth, how when he was young he drank wine. I tippled wine and took my joy and sold and squandered my hoard and my patrimony till all my family deserted me, and I sat alone like a lonely camel scabby with mange, yet I saw the sons of the dust did not deny me. So he talks about, because he was supposedly killed in a barroom brawl, I think, or something like that. So now this poem has tavern material and some material like that. Let's just quick take a look at, if I can find it. Back to Kritzeck here. He's got the whole poem again. He doesn't cut it like Arberry does, which I object to cutting things. So he got on here about the tigress-bound vessel. This is on page 59 of Kritzeck. And he gets here to, her ears are true, clearly detecting a night journey, the fearful rustle of a whisper, the hyper's crowd, sharp tipped, her noble pedigree plain in them, pricked her ears like a wild cow of Hamul alone pasturing. Her trepid heart pulses strongly, quick yet firm as a pounding rock set in the midst of a solid boulder. If you so wish, her head strains in the saddle's pommel, and she swims with a forearm, fleet as a male ostrich. And if you wish, her pace is slack or swift to your fancy, fearing the curled whip, fashion of twisted hide, slit as her upper lip, her nose bored and sensitive, delicate when she sweeps the ground with it fast as she runs. Such is the beast I ride. When my companion cries, would I might ransom you? And then he goes on to this dancing girl wine game. And I am at her with the whip, and my she-camel quickens her pace, and I am not one that skulks fearfully among the hilltops. And if you hunt me in the taverns, there you'll catch me. Come to me when you will, I'll pour you a flowing cup. And if you don't need it, well, do without it, and good luck to you. Whenever the tribe is assembled, you'll come with me to the summit of the noble house. And my boon companions are white as stars, and a singing wench comes to us in her striped gown, as her saffron robe, wide the opening of her collar, delicate her skin to my companion's fingers. She's dancing one of these belly dances that we're now familiar with. Tender her nakedness, we say, let's hear from you. She advances to us, chanting fluently, her glance languid as song. Did these things end in the same place? I'm not sure. Let's see. Well, this one doesn't. Where's 23? Lost that. It's a different end here according to Arberry's translation. But anyway, it gives you a good example of those poems. One last one I want to look at is this tale of Antara, the Black Knight. Now, when we're talking about Arab color blindness at that time, Antara is considered to be black. Obviously, the son originally probably of an Afro-Arab slave of some kind. And then he bore a wife of one of these chieftains or something like that. His poem is only given to you in the Arberry collection, but because he was considered to be the best warrior of his time and he answered challenges about his skin color with the fact that he could fight better. So this is a war poem. We've had love poems, we've had camel poems, we've had wine poems, we've had dancing poems. Now we have a war poet in Antara. Let me see if I can find him. Here it is, page 26 of Arberry. So we give a little prelude to it. One of the greatest medical romances of the Arabs tells us the exploits of the pre-Islamic warrior Antara. I got his name on the board for you. So here he has his excerpts from his poem. Let's see if I've got it all here. Praise me therefore for the things you know of me, for I am easy to get on with, provided I'm not wrong. But if I'm wrong, then wrong I do is harsh indeed. We don't have the love prelude here. He talks about his exploits in battle. It may also be mentioned how often I have drunk good wine in the noon sweltering calm from a bright-figured bowl and a glittered golden glass scored with lines partnered to a lustrous filtered flask on its left. And whenever I have drunk recklessly, I squander my substance, while when my honor is abounding, unimpaired, and whenever I have sobered up, I diminish not my bounty, and my qualities and my nobility being as you have known them. And many is a good wife's spouse I have left on the floor. How? My fist having beaten him to it with a hasty blow, and the spray of a deep thrust died like dragon's blood. I can advise you, daughter of Moloch, to ask the horseman if you should happen to be ignorant and uninformed, for never I'm out of the saddle of a strong swimmer, sturdy, assaulted again and again by the warriors, wounded, now detached for the lance thrusting in anon, resorting to the great host with their tight bows. Those who were present at the engagement will acquaint you how I plunge into battle, but I abstain from the booty taking. In other words, I'm first in battle and last to take booty. And many's the bristling knight the warriors have shunned to take on, one who was not in a hurry to flee or capitulate. My hands have been right generous to, with the hasty the thrust of a well-tempered, strong-jointed, straightened spear, giving him a broad, double-sided gash, the hiss of which guides in the night season the prowling, famished wolves. I split through his accoutrements with my solid lance, and even in the noblest is not sacrosanct to the spear, and left him carrion for the wild beast to pounce on, all of him, from the crown of his head to his limp wrists. And then we get this description of his horse in the middle of battle here. So, frankly, this poetry is better to me than most American poetry you read today. If American poetry write like this, even in modern English, we'd be impressed. And this is just a translation. When in the midst of battle dust I heard the cry of Mura. We remember Mura from that old bird's nest legend. Ascend shrill, and the two sons of Rabia and all Muhalim were striving beneath their banner, and death stalked beneath the sons of Muhalim were involved in this feud here. And there I knew for sure that when the issue was joined with them, such a blow would fall as to scare the bird from its snuggling chicks. There's the lark's nest image. When I beheld the people advancing in solid mass, urging each other on, I wheeled on them blamelessly. Untura they were calling, and the lances were like well ropes sinking into the breast of my black steed. Continuously I charged them with his white blazing face and his breast until his body was caparisoned in blood, and he twisted round with the spear's impact upon his breast and complained to me, sobbing and whimpering. Had he known the art of conversation, my horse that is, he would have protested, and had he been acquainted with speech, he would have spoken to me. The horse is frowning terribly, plunging in the crumbling soil, long-bodied mare along with short-haired, long-bodied stallion, and oh, my soul was cured, and its faint sickness was healed by the horseman's cry, ah, Antura, on with you. So we get battle poetry here. One last point I want to raise before next time. I'll tell you what we're going to do next time. I guess we've got to move along. We have a lot to cover all these cultural subjects. Where was that page here I was doing out of Kritzeck here? There was one more. Nosip here in what we had in Kritzeck. I thought I wanted to read it to you here. Well, we had it in that Labet poem. I guess that's where it was. There's a little bit here in the Ode of Tarafa here, where he speaks about the camp. So I guess we already did it in the Labet poem. Next time, what I want you to do is, this is very hard. I've collected this collection for you because it's less expensive than getting 3 different books. The material comes from 3 different books. I want to do what's called in Arabic Thanks. Not to understand. What's called adab literature. Adab literature is the literature of what we would call prose. And it develops in Arabic again in the Abbasid period. We don't really have them. We have the Koran, we have hadith, we have poetry. We don't have any prose literature. That comes from the Persian too. The Persians coming into Islam under the Abbasid period. And the first is a translation from Persian, but the Persian translation originally was from an Indian work that was in Pahlavi. It was called The Fables of Bidpai. It was originally a work that came all the way from India. It went into Persian, and then when this was translated into Arabic in the Abbasid period, it became known as Khalila Wadimna. And it's really a Walt Disney story. Khalila Wadimna are two jackals. And they tell stories within stories within stories. Tales with morals, but they're really for entertainment at court. A court like a Persian king would have enjoyed, with courtiers and everything else, not a Muslim sheikh or something, or a Bedouin tribesman. A court like the Abbasid court in Baghdad. And these would be stories that would be told at court. And what they do is tell you how to be a good courtier, how to survive at court among very dangerous forces there in what would be the Abbasid Caliphate period. And also, they're not Islamic again. They're very anti-Islamic. And the person who translated these was a son of a Persian convert, Ibn al-Muqaffa. He was executed by al-Mansur, the first strong Abbasid caliph, for translating these stories into Arabic. This is how seriously they were taken. But this is the first prose work in Arabic, too. And again, I think it has an anti-Arab flair because it's anti-Islam flair, because there's nothing Islamic in this work at all. It's totally how to get ahead in the world. It's really a shopkeeper work. A mentality and a morality of shopkeepers that you will find if you go from Vienna to Saigon, or from Dubai all the way to Seoul, Korea. The mentality of how to get money in this world, how to get ahead, how to raise your kids and give them money, how to make a name for yourself in this way, and how to pass this on to your children. It has nothing to do with passing a good name from Allah on to your children. It has to do with passing family wealth on to your children and guarding it and hoarding it and being careful. In other words, it's the middle class ethic of the whole shopkeeper world that I think you would say existed from the east of the Mediterranean on to China and Korea and Vietnam and places like that, India and so on. So it's a really, so that's adab literature. So I want you to read that, and then there's another work called The Dove's Necklace. That's a later work in Spain that I would like you to look at as well. And you'll find that in the collection there too. And the last one that's in the Kritzeck material, Jahiz, who is another Afro-American, Afro-Arab writer, black writer, who is considered the master of Arab prose. And he writes essays. And some of his essays are in the Kritzeck one. Al-Jahiz means goggle-eyed. He looked like a frog, they thought, I guess. But in any case, he also writes prose works that are really exquisite. So next time we'll look at some of those prose works and on into next week, and then the end of next week we'll look at the poetry. That's how I see things. I don't know if we have any other classes after next week, do we? Next week, the last week? Well, anyway, we'll do the prose and we'll see what poetry we can get to. Later poetry. Okay. Sorry for the work. But we need an extra week or two in this class, but somehow we lost it. Anyway, good luck. But you'll be an expert on Islamic culture when you're done, so I'm not worried. Here's a sign-up sheet. Oh, hey, red board wiper. Not mine, the next guy.